Good morning. Try to get this computer to cooperate with me. All right, this morning, as I had opportunity that I'm grateful to be able to speak. I'm not grateful that Jeff is not, but we'll take advantage where advantage is available. This morning, I want to talk about some difficult current affairs of the world that I've heard a lot about here recently within the last week. It's one of those type of things that it's difficult to talk about. And a lot of times we shudder a lot of times when we have to talk about some of these type of things, but they're worldly problems and they've been biblical problems. I've been hearing a lot about on the news here lately that Washington is working on a set of new laws that they would like to make it legal for any child that is 13 years or older, that they could become a boy if they're a girl, or the other way around. I want to use discretion in this conversation, that we try to keep it G-rated because we do have a lot of children that are here. We don't want to bring out too much information, but we're going to let the Bible kind of speak on this, and we'll try to use biblical phrases talking about this difficult topic. But, you know, the government, they want to introduce this legislation, though, because they want to make it easier for children that if they felt like they wanted to identify one way or the other, they could. Well, they also want to make it to where the parents, you don't have any say-so in whether this can happen or whether it cannot happen. That the child of 13 years old has the authority to decide something like this themselves. They also want to make it, as part of this bill, that insurance policies do not have the right to deny that this could be done to a child if the said child decides that they wanted to make such a change as this and decided that they maybe were born a girl and they didn't like that, or they were born a boy and they didn't like that. Now, I can remember back when I was 13 years old, you know, I didn't make too many decisions that didn't outweigh a bowl of cereal, which one I wanted, much less an absolute life-changing, altering thing that would potentially affect me the rest of my life. I'd hate to think that my parents would not have had the ability to have helped me with some of the absolutely ridiculous things that I decided as a child that I thought were good that were not. Now, if it was not for their ability to help guide me down paths that sometimes were difficult, I can assure you I would have made wrong choices if they had not have had that ability. Now, if that's not bad enough, you know, that our government is trying to do those type of things, which is absolute horrible evil. It's just an evil thing to even think that you would try to do something like that. I heard also on the radio today that Walt Disney World has decided that their top CEO has decided that for the next few years, their main focus is going to be on the homosexual characters as main characters being part of their cartoons for children. That's going to be a main focus that they're going to have, is on the LGBTQ, whatever other letters they've got in all that, part of their main storyline for their main characters. Now, the reason for that is because the head CEO has two daughters that have decided that they are part of the transgender community. She wants to celebrate that they have come out and that they're part of that, and they want to give characters out there for people in the community to be able to identify with, to help other people make that transition. Now, these are difficult things to talk about. They're hard things that we don't want to talk about. But if we are not willing to talk about them and decide what the Bible says about them, well, I can guarantee you Walt Disney is going to decide what our children should think about them for us. Now, you're going to have to be mindful of those things, as I suspect that they are going to continue to become part of our world. I know that from the time that I was in high school and elementary type school, these things, you never thought about those things. You never saw those kind of things. But the schools that our children go to now through the public school system, and I suspect in others, these things are openly portrayed. These things are openly done and taught to our children that this is not sinful, this is normal. It's normalcy. So we're going to take a little bit of a look today. We're going to go back to the Bible and we're going to see, well, who cares what the world thinks about anything? What we really need to know is, what does God think about something? So we're going to go to Genesis chapter 3. We're going to take a look at Genesis chapter 3 and verse 20. And there it tells us, it says, Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all living. Now, that was the start of where we see God's plan for how the family and how things were supposed to be. Now, as the old saying goes, is God didn't create Adam and Steve, He created Adam and Eve. And that's still very true, that God created man and a helpmate for him, which was woman. And she would become the mother of all living. That takes away the thought that is sometimes out there is, well, God created Adam and Eve, but He created other people too, and that's how we got all of these people that are in the world. No. God created Adam and Eve, and they were the parents of all to follow from that point. Let's flip over here to chapter 1. We're going to take a look at chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. So it says, Adam was with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now, I want to take and pay close attention to that in here, because the world is saying that, it's a choice of what you want to be. It's trying to say, well, if you were born one way or the other, well, it's just a choice on what you decide you want to be. Well, I'm not so sure that that's what it said right here. It said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Well, who was involved in this? It was the help of the Lord that a man was born. So is this now just a simple choice that Cain and Abel could say, well, I know I had the help of the Lord to be a man, but I've decided I want to do something else? Well, I think that that's going against the help of the Lord as to what He had decided, or God had decided, is going to be who you are. I think that's something that we need to consider as we move through this. So we'll also go here to Genesis chapter 5. And we'll take a look at Genesis chapter 5. It says, this is the written account of Adam's line. God created man. He made him in the likeness of God. God created them male and female and blessed them. And when they were created, He called them man. When Adam lived 130 years, he had a son of his own likeness in his own image, and he named him Seth. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived 930 years and he died. Now, there's several things in there. This picks up after Cain and Abel and what happened with Cain and Abel. And they had a son, Seth, it looks like the next child in the lineage to be born to Cain and Abel. Wasn't the only three children that they had. It says that they had multiple sons and daughters. But after Cain and Abel, it says, when God created man, he made them in the likeness of God. Well, that could be talking about Cain and Abel. And it says, he created them male and female and blessed them. And when they were created, he called them man. Well, maybe that's just talking about Cain and Abel, but maybe it's not, because it said, as we just read, that God helped to create the son that Eve gave Cain. So I think that you could also imply into this that as God was part of helping this creation of a wonderful thing that we call life, and giving the breath of life to anything that is a living being, I think God is an important part of that we don't fully understand. Now, I don't know how the soul of man gets attached to the life of man, and I don't think that the Bible gives us a definition of how that happens, but I know it's there. And the only way that it could make any sense whatsoever to me that the life of man and the soul of man could somehow be blended together is God somehow is working in that. Now, are we going to take the creation of God and turn it into an abomination because of what man decides that they want to do? Or are we going to teach our young people to have an appreciation for who they are and what God has created, and show them that God loved you and God still loves you, and he has a plan that you could be with him eternally. Now, we're letting our young people get hung up on whether they were born a boy or whether they were born a girl, and not celebrating that they were born a boy or they were born a girl. And you know, there's a lot of great, wonderful things that either one can accomplish in this life if they embrace the plan of God to be a person. If you follow the plans that God have for just living, just being a human being and just being a person, I can promise you that if you can, to the best of your ability, steer away from the sinful things in the world, the wonderful things that God has laid out for man, they're full of blessings. They're full of great, wonderful things that will happen to you within your lifetime, regardless of whether you're a boy or whether you're a girl. And God has planned out a wonderful life that he would want us to have. You know, that was his original choice. God's original choice was we'd live in paradise. We'd have a wonderful life. Well, we messed it up. We blew that opportunity. Well, we got, okay, well, we're on to the next phase. But it's still God's plan that each and every person would have a wonderful life in service to him. And it can be done. If I can move this computer along here. But even in Abraham's extremely long life, most of us could never fathom the thought of, you were going to have a child. If I ask most of the people back here in this back corner, hey, you ladies ready to have a child? Any of you want to have a baby back here? Well, how about 130 years old? You think about, oh, well, we're going to have a baby in the house. Well, that's a bit of a stretch for us nowadays. But in Abraham, or not Abraham, but Adam had a very long life. About 900 years that he lived. I don't think that in any of his children's lives they ever had an inkling to conceive that, what, man, I was born a girl. Can't believe that. We're going to have to make a change to this. I don't think that was ever thought about. I would almost guarantee that the earth had a time frame there that a lot of those things that the homosexual community would consider, they were never thought about in Adam's family. But you know what? It didn't take long before the world thought about them. And it didn't take extremely long period of time before the world became corrupt. In Genesis chapter 6, starting in verse 9 here, it says, this is the account of Noah. Now Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time. He walked with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But here's the kicker. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people of the earth had corrupted their ways. Well, what do you think they had corrupted it with? Well, one we know was violence, because it said that they were violent people, but they had turned to sinful things. And we do know that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed because of homosexuality, was one of the reasons that they were destroyed for. And I would almost guarantee that those type of thoughts had entered into the world by Noah's time. And they were beginning to be seen at that point by people in Noah's time. How did God react to all of this sin? Well, I'll tell you how he reacted to it. He destroyed them all. He got rid of it all, and he started over again. Now, that's not an uncommon thing that we see in the Bible, that when you go outside of God's plan, it creates a lot of problems. So, let's take a look here at Genesis chapter 10. Verse 1, it says, this is the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's son, who themselves had sons after the flood. So we pick up from that point that, okay, everything started from Adam and Eve, and all of that was destroyed. I'm sure that was several thousands of people after 1,000 years. Well, up to that point, it resets. And you start with Noah and his family and their wives, and they begin to have sons and daughters. Now, it was allowed during that time that sons and daughters could become husbands and wives. And that was a commonly done thing because there were no other people. You only had your brother or your sister to consider as what would potentially someday be your husband or your wife. Well, God did not set up, though. Man set up that, well, you know what? I think you should have like 6 or 7 wives. Or maybe you should have multiple wives. And he did not allow multiple husbands, things like that. That's where the family began to break down, and it broke down pretty early on. We can see in, we'll go over to Genesis chapter 25. And it says here, Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him, I can't pronounce all these kids, but about 7 children here. And you know what? As time went on, that became problems. Now, we know that God had told Abraham and Sarah, I'm going to give you a child. You're going to have a child. Well, it wasn't happening in the way that they thought that that should happen. So they went outside of God's plan, and Abraham had other wives, and that made other children. Well, that set up some real problems that they had to deal with. Down in verse 5, it says, Abraham left everything he owned to Isaac. Now, Isaac was the planned son by God, as we remember back through the story. But while he was still living, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them away from his son Isaac to the land of the east. Now, why in the world would Abraham have done that? Why would he say, you know what, I'm giving everything to Isaac, but all these other kids and all these other wives and everything, I got to send them off to somewhere else. Well, I think that that's because, Abraham, he realized when I pass on from here and when I die, this is going to be an absolute mess. And when these kids and these wives start trying to sort things out among themselves, well, I'd kind of went against God's plan. He got back in line with God's plan, and he said, okay, here was God's plan. The rest of it, I'm sending away. Well, we see that in today's world. We have got one young man that had worked for me at one time, and he had 7 different stepbrothers and sisters, and no 2 were from the same parents. Now, you tell me that doesn't get a little complicated in a family where you've got 7 siblings, and that's pretty much what Abraham had right here, and they're not all from the same parents. Well, you can definitely see where that would set up a lot of problems that they would have to deal with when the family goes outside of what God had set into play. That wasn't one of the only times, though, that we can see that that was the case. If we go over to Genesis chapter 29, starting in verse 10, now here was a case where things were sanctioned by God, and they probably would have followed God's plan. But in Genesis chapter 29, in verse 10, let's pick up here, and it says, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep loudly. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. Now, here you've got what we'd consider nowadays kissing cousins, which, we all kind of steer away from a little bit here. But at that time, this was a sanctioned, approved type of a relationship that, cousins and things like that could marry, and they could intermarry. But this did become a problem. And you can see where, even in today's world, trying to have these type of a relationship with close family members can become a real problem. So as time went on, God set out a lot of plans of how these relationships between men and women were supposed to be, and what relationships were not supposed to be. They're pretty well spelled out throughout the New Testament, but a nice place that we could see all of these that kind of comes together in one spot is in Leviticus chapter 18. So we're going to take a look here this morning at Leviticus chapter 18. And we're going to read a little bit of this here, and I think it'll give a pretty good idea of what God's expectations of relationships were to be. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You must not do as they do in Egypt, where they used to live. You must not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you. Do not follow their practices. You must obey the laws and be careful to follow my decrees. I am the Lord your God. Keep my decrees and laws, for the man who obeys them will live by them. I am the Lord. No one is to approach any close relative for any sexual relations. I am the Lord. Do not dishonor your father by having sexual relations with your mother. She is your mother. Do not have relations with her. Do not have relations with your father's wife. That would dishonor your father. Do not have relations with your sister either. Your father's daughter or your mother's daughter, whether she was born in the same home or elsewhere. Do not have relations with your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter. That would dishonor you. Do not have relations with your daughter or your father's wife, born of your father. She is your sister. Do not have relations with your father's sister. She is your father's close relative. Do not have relations with your mother's sister, because she is your mother's close relative. Do not dishonor your father's brother by approaching your father's wife to have relations. She is your aunt. Do not have relations with your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. Do not have relations with her. Do not have relations with your brother's wife, that you would dishonor your brother. Do not have relations with both a woman and her daughter. Do not have relations with either your son's daughter or her daughter's daughter. They are close relatives. That is wickedness. Do not take your wife's sister as a rival wife and have relations with her while she is living." This goes on, but you can continue to see the pattern of these things. Now, God has set up and said there are things that you can do that are immoral in this. Homosexuality is one of those things. But you know, another thing that is extremely horrible, disservice, is to think that the way that God made you and designed you, that you would let a child grow up in such a way that when they looked into the mirror, the only thing that they saw was something horrible. I want to be something else. I want to be something more than I am. Now, if you can start a child at the youngest age, teaching them how to respect the God and the Father, well, as they grow up, we can hopefully teach them the beauty of what God created in them as well. There's a lot of things here that passage continues to go on and on about, which I would recommend you could continue to read through that. And you can see there's a lot of ways that I would scarcely say there are a few of those that this world that we live in does not do today. Those are evil things. And I do realize, yes, that's the Old Testament, but these things are still true in the New Testament. You can find them easily in the New Testament. It just nicely puts them all together in one place, that these things were not meant to be. So, hopefully, this will help to clarify some of the things that are going on in the world today, that don't let your children be sucked in by these evil things that are trying to be done out there. One of the things that many times I was accused of as a parent, and it's the honest truth, you shelter your kids from the real world. Darn straight I do. And the longer that I can continue to shelter my children from the evil of the real world, I'm going to stand up there and take it for them and shelter them from the evil of the real world. And I am going to try to put a hedge around them, and I am going to try to prevent them from falling into the temptations of sin. I am going to be constantly aware of what's on my computer screen and what's being looked at there. I'm going to be interested in what's being played on my TV and what they're listening to there, what they're listening to on the radio. And you know what? I'm not going to give up. That when I die, what I'm going to pass on to my children is that I will see you again when we get to the other side, guys. I hope that you will take the conviction of those things that God is right. Let's stick with the things that He has said. There is the potential that there is someone here today that maybe not in this category, but in any category that sin separates you from God. As we talked about in our Bible class, you are separated from God no matter what the sin is, and it's very likely He will not hear you again until you return to Him. If there's anyone here this morning for any reason that we could help you with, that you would like to turn to God or turn back to God, we would offer an invitation that you'd come at this time as we stand and sing.